The greatest advice I always give HR people is learn the business of the business. You have to speak their language. You have to understand that you have to worry about the people, but you have to worry about the business, right? Instead of flooding an organizational layoff, perhaps you should be triggering discussions on a layoff because you understand the business, right? So, really understand the business and learn to say yes, not get your influence by saying no.
This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast where we talk to HR innovators about all things people leadership. If you're looking for places to find about new ways to think about the world of work, this is the podcast for you. Please subscribe from your favorite podcast listening platform today and leave us a review. Rebel on, HR Rebels. Welcome back, Rebel HR listeners. Extremely excited for the conversation today. I had to hit record because we were just having a wonderful conversation about everything from working back at the deli shop to weddings and wearing ties. And so with us today is Bob Kelleher. Bob is an author, speaker, and founder of the Employee Engagement Group. He also has founded the AEC HR Summit. He is a thought leader on employee engagement and leadership. He presents to audiences, including my company, about all things related to employee engagement and great leadership. A really great friend and a great colleague. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kyle. I am absolutely delighted to be here with you and your audience. Thanks.
Thank you. And I appreciate you taking the time today. And I really think that our listeners are going to get some great content. I think that, my personal experience with some of the work that you've done and the things that you've shared with my team have been really impactful. And I've heard nothing but wonderful responses from some of the work we've done. And I just think it's going to be really valuable for our listeners. So I'd like to start out by just understanding a little bit more about your background. What brought you into the rich world of employee engagement?
Well, I think this will certainly resonate with your listeners. I'm a human resources professional, so I spent many years in the trenches. I think I'll be giving my age away, but here goes. I was a personnel rep in 1985, and through a series of jobs in the human resources area, I became corporate employment manager, became director of training and development, became chief HR officer, became executive VP of human resources and organizational development, and actually became chief operations officer. So I've spoken at a lot of HR conferences. Just on that note alone, as you know, Kyle, HR doesn't usually get a seat at the table in which you are running the company. And I did, and I think it speaks to your audience that if you operate as the HR traditional, caretaker of policies, you're not going to become chief operations officer. So I did that for over 30 years. In 2009, I was chief HR officer for a global 50,000 employee company. I had an epiphany. I wanted to. I heard from so many people that I needed to write a book. I had spent many years inside focusing on engagement as a business driver, not as a nice to do thing. And just so many people said, hey, you have to capture this. This is a case study. So I wrote my first book. People started asking me to talk on the book. That led to really a speaking business. People started asking me, can you come and help us? And that led to, a consulting business. Then they started asking, hey, do you do surveys? And too much of a capitalist to always say no. So I finally said yes. And that led to, selling products and here I am. So for the past 13 years, people could find me at the Employee Engagement Group on employeeengagement.com.
Absolutely. And, I think it's really important to, maybe take a step back and dig into one of the comments you made, because it's something that I've seen again and again when employee engagement works, in whether it's a department that's engaged or a company that's engaged or a leader that's engaged, the business just runs better. It just works. You see better results. So, and you mentioned that engagement in your role was really a business driver. So unpack that a little bit. As we look at employee engagement, we think about all the things we do. How do we really tap into that engagement as a driver of the business?
Yeah, selfishly, when I started focusing on engagement, I didn't really know, Kyle, it was going to be a business driver. I just didn't want to spend my career showing up to various locations and having people hate to see me, right? Because they would view that I was there to manage a layoff or a termination, or I was there to let them know that their benefit premiums were going up, right? So it was all bad news stuff. So I really started proactively showing up to help facilitate. I had facilitation skills like a lot of HR people do, and I started facilitating group discussions about their business. If you're underperforming in sales, why? So I was able to leverage my facilitation skills to really help the business. And this became an internal program, and businesses started asking me to appear to do an all-day workshop on this. We called it Leadership Excellence Through Advanced Practices, but it really was an HR-led internal initiative. There was a business improvement program. And the outcome of that, managers and employees would say, we were engaged in the business. And I was so early in this whole concept, Kyle, that, employeeengagement.com was a domain that I acquired. It was sitting out there. I acquired it because so many people started calling me the engagement guy. So it was really, in some ways, selfishly motivated to get myself doing things that were more positively received by the business instead of negatively received. And as it turned out, we started tracking the business. If I would appear and do a workshop, we would see business results going up. And at the time, we got acquired by a private equity firm. And the private equity people loved this process and that we were using, and they started asking me to use the process with sister companies, and we started measuring the business results. So I was living a case study. And when we got acquired by a global company, they started asking me to do the same work with their Hong Kong operations in Brazil, in Dubai. So I lived it. I lived it. Now, if you Google employee engagement business results, you'll see Gallup. I mean, there's a whole boutique industry right now that measures this. If you have higher engagement, you're going to have higher results on your business. And if you have lower engagement, at some point in time, it will negatively impact the business.
Absolutely. And I think, what's really interesting is, and I'm sure many HR professionals feel this way, that there's this constant question out there, the seat at the table, as you described it, right? How do you gain the credibility? How do you get that seat? And in my opinion, it really comes down to solve business problems and drive results. And then you don't have to fight for a seat. People will just ask you to be there. Was that your experience?
Yeah, I hated the perception of HR as, the evil HR director, in Dilbert. And in some cases, and I hate to insult your audience, so I will apologize in advance for what I'm going to say, but in some cases, that reputation was deserved with the HR professional who truly viewed their power, their influence, was, the gatekeeper of policies, right? No, you can't do this because we'll get sued. And I always wanted to introduce a concept of, learn to say yes. So if the benefit form is arriving 2 days late, instead of saying we can't give our employee and their family benefits, why can't we? Why can't we? So let's learn to say yes. Let's try to help. Or if somebody wants to lay someone off, I don't want to tell the president of the European operations they can't. I want to be in a position of counseling them, give them the pluses and minuses, and letting them know this is your decision, not my decision. I'm here to help you. not here to tell you what you can and cannot do. So, the greatest advice I always give HR people is learn the business of the business. You have to speak their language. You have to understand that, you have to worry about the people, but you have to worry about the business, right? Instead of funding an organizational layoff, perhaps you should be triggering discussions on a layoff because you understand the business, right? So really understand the business and learn to say yes, not get your influence by saying no.
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're a private practice owner, here's why you want to hire virtual assistants. Virtual assistants not only can perform all of the non-clinical responsibilities by supporting or replacing your current team, but they can do it at a fraction of the cost, all while improving the patient care experience. Virtual Rockstar was created for private practice owners by a private practice owner who wants to help you gain greater profitability and freedom. We'll teach you how to work with virtual assistants, all while helping bring a family out of poverty. Visit www.virtualrockstar.com today to learn more and book your free discovery call at www.virtualrockstar.com.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. One of the interesting things about my early career that I reflect on is, one of the best things that I got to do is I was in an operations role before human resources, and I wanted to be in human resources after I was in that operations role when I figured out what HR did. And that was interesting to me. But I had to figure out the business before they let me do HR. And that, for me, that was a really big blessing because I had a team of, at certain times, well over 100 employees that I was supervising. And I was struggling as a new leader and as a leader in general, that when I went into HR, I understood the day-to-day struggles in the life of somebody in an operations role, so I could be a better partner for them. And I also knew what their job was, right? That helps. You have to understand those things.
There's a reason why some of these long-standing, most admired companies, Pepsi, Procter and Gamble, GE before they had their recent hiccup. They would historically rotate people from operations into corporate roles, right? Because they wanted them to understand, if you're an HR person and you have no idea what the business is like, or you don't know what being in the field is like versus being in, corporate headquarters. And I think that is such an important evolution. I always tell, HR functions, if you can, spend time in operations. If you can't do it through a transfer, get out there, be proactive, do something that you do well for them, and get to know their business. Have them see you as part of their team, not part of the HR function. So I think your experience in operations, my experience as COO, taught me as much about my function in human resources as my prior, 25 years at the time in human resources. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was a powerful learning moment for me. The other thing that your comments it jogged my memory about was a scenario where, and I've told this story on the podcast before, so if I'm boring any listeners, I apologize, but I had an HR mentor early on who literally told me, HR's job is to be equal opportunity, hate everybody the same. And it was said as a joke, but there, under every little bit of sarcasm, there's a little bit of truth there. But that really, that kind of that compliance mindset that, hey, let's just make sure we don't get sued. Like, just thinking in that context, that will ripple out into all of your actions. And that just, like, I don't know about you, Bob, that just sounds like that would just suck. I don't want to do that job in a selfish way.
I know. And, I have a lot of clients, really all over the globe. And, once again, I might be insulting the function, but if I'm hired by the CEO or COO, it's a different relationship if I'm hired by some of the human resource folks who are still in that compliant, telling me, well, you can't say this, you can't do this, you can't, so it runs deep inside the function, and I do think it has changed. I mean, it's changed so much for the better, Kyle. The vast majority of human resource professionals, when I first entered HR in the personnel department, we weren't trained personnel people. I was a former school teacher, right? It was always funny that the CFO was, a CPA and they had an MBA, and the HR person, 6 months prior, they were in charge of the receptionist. So the evolution of the function has evolved for the better so much in the past 30 years. So, it's a function that I love daily. Even when I was COO, I was a successor to the CEO, and I wanted to get back into my comfort area of focusing on the people, which I always found to be the best part of the job. But the function has certainly evolved, and these associations and podcasts and Disrupt HR. There is a breed of HR people that I think have been doing some great things, pushing the function, and I'm on the second nine, not the front nine, but I do see a lot of people really pushing the function in a more innovative, edgy way that I think is great.
Absolutely. I think, that's certainly been my experience, at least over the last, decade or so that I've been, working, more directly in the function. And I think, what's really been interesting is the change over the last few years, kind of the acceleration of change with, trying to figure out work from home, social unrest, dealing with something that we never thought we would deal with, a global pandemic. And I remember talking to my CEO, who really well, Bob, and and his comment at one point was, "This is all HR. All of this is the most important thing right now, is taking care of the people and putting the people first." And having a leader like that, having a focus like that, especially in these times, I think is so critical. But I guarantee you that there's so many professionals listening to this right now that are nodding their heads up and down. Yes, I agree. But then the next question is, but how do I do that in my organization? So from your standpoint, Bob, as you think about the changes that you've seen and the changes that maybe still need to occur in many of our organizations, what would be some steps that you would recommend an HR professional do if they see that there needs to be some level of change or elevation or focus on the people?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Kyle, because is it the culture that the function is not being allowed to be influential, or is it the individual sitting in the seat who's incapable of being influential? So it's a tough one to paint with a broad base brush, right? But I would say if you view yourself as an innovative, disruptive type of HR person or function or team, and you have some resistance because the CEO, him or her, is resistant to the HR function. Maybe they had a bad experience, right? So maybe they view the HR department as the police department. Then I would encourage you to find the most senior person organizationally who does support the function. Bond with that person, that function. Get them as your partner, and increasing that that visibility of both you personally as well as the function. Because there's always someone who reports up to the CEO who gets it, in case the CEO or COO doesn't. Find that person, partner with that person, create value. If by some chance that it's the culture, and it's an old-fashioned organizational culture that the function is never going to get the respect Life is too short to not have influence. And I would encourage people to weigh their career options elsewhere. Try to fix where you are. It's always easier, I think, than to, look to change the jobs every time there's a hiccup. But occasionally you might find yourself in an organization that if the frustration level is so high and you can't influence, there are so many organizations that are looking for HR to lead that I would encourage you to weigh some alternatives.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, this is Chris Bierling, host of the People and Performance podcast. Each episode features conversations Bill Banham and I have with leaders and consultants about ways they've inspired colleagues to thrive. Past People and Performance podcast guests are from such brands as NASA, IBM, Rolls-Royce, and McKinsey & Co. You can find us on your podcast player of choice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's a really important point. I think, having an ally is really important, the right ally. And I think being honest about that, that cultural question. But I also think the other point I think that is really really important was the comment about, is it the individual? Before you jump, have you really done everything, that you can do to expand your influence?
Right.
Are you saying yes as much as you can? Are you really thinking outside the box? Or are you just frustrated because somebody asked a question that you didn't like the tone of? You know what I mean? But there's you have, I truly believe you kind of have to ask those questions internally. And yes, once you've checked the box that, I really have asked those questions. Yeah, it's time to think about doing something else.
Yeah, I just had a discussion with a client who's a wonderful HR professional who feels somewhat left out of the inner circle of the CEO. But she's bonded with the COO in such a way that it has given her hope and encouragement that, it's a good company. She also views, CEO tenures aren't that long. And she's concluded that the organizational culture, the COO, other people, it's worth sticking it out, even if the head person maybe has a legacy opinion of HR that isn't favorable. So, there's such personal decisions. I do believe the HR folks can help themselves, stay current, read the latest, go to the conferences, hear what other people are saying, build your network, and look at your function in the mirror. Are you a business partner or are you a business police department? And ask what can we ourselves do differently?
Yeah. Well, I mean, admittedly, I certainly fall into that trap of almost like being like the traffic cop, right? And it's because it's how many of us were trained or brought up. You're supposed to be the policy police. You're supposed to be the black and white, decider in a lot of cases. But so often you lose the human element, and you you get stuck in this. It's almost like getting stuck in a rut where you just kind of become an autonomous decision maker.
The greatest advice.
It's just terrible.
The greatest advice I give people, and I used to practice this myself. If you are in human resources, everything you do that's reactive doesn't get noticed unless you do something wrong. So think about that for a moment. All of the administrative things that people do, all of the reactive things, filling requisitions, managing open enrollment in your pay program and trying to deal with the escalation of salaries in an inflationary period. All of the administrative things that come across our desk, which can exhaust all of us, I put in a reactive camp. True personal engagement occurs when we are proactive. So how do you establish a day? And I used to tell my team, I had 450 HR people reporting to me. And I used to say, try to schedule your week so that 50% of your week is proactive and 50% of your week is reactive. Proactive would be you're inviting yourself to a department meeting. You're creating a virtual training program for employees. You're introducing a new employee referral program. And personal engagement comes when you're introducing and doing something proactively. But the function is so administrative heavy that you find yourself in a rut. You can just like sit there. And I used to joke with my wife, I could sit in my office and never do anything that would be proactive. Like everything comes to me, emails, telephone calls, time for open enrollment, boss wants to see me, like everything comes. And when I would separate myself and introduce stuff, I'm designing a new program, I'm showing up to a department, I'm creating an event. Those were the things that would just make me be electrified, and the things that would get me noticed. So I finally concluded, hey, any proactive thing I do gets me positive press, or the department positive press. Anything that's administrative that comes to me, the press can only be bad when you do something wrong.
Yeah, recruiting comes to mind.
Yeah, well,
it's only bad when it's expected that you fill all these open positions, but it's bad when you have too many.
Absolutely. Or the ghost positions, right? So people get the approval for a rec, and they really don't want to fill it, but it kills your process, your recruiting team, days to fill a rec.
Yeah.
Those things can be tough.
Yeah, I've had that. Yeah, especially lately, I seem to have a lot of those dialogues. But it's been interesting. But here's one thing that I will say on that is, in one of my locations, I have a leader who truly believes in employee engagement. He lives it, he breathes it, he's involved, he listens. And guess who has 0 open positions right now in a manufacturing setting?
Yeah.
He has people asking to work here because they have referrals and that's just another great example of like the business is running smoothly. Retention is great because we have a leader who believes in employee engagement and truly supports.
It's not coincidental, Kyle.
Right.
There's a reason why he has no open requisitions.
Yeah. So even if you're just looking at this from a purely selfish, standpoint, it's like, it really isn't fun to have to hire people and have vacant positions. So, if you don't want to do that, then employee engagement can really help.
Well, think of filling your swimming pool. If you have a big giant hole in your liner, right? It's really difficult. And it's the same concept. If you have low engagement, which usually results in higher than industry average voluntary turnover, right? And you're trying to grow your business, the hardest thing in the world to do is add headcount while you're also replacing headcount, and it becomes toxic, as people leave, even people who weren't thinking of leaving start thinking of leaving, right? It's the Pied Piper effect. And I think, focusing on engagement has just so many tangible benefits. Something as simple as your employee referral percents go way up when people are engaged enough to refer their colleagues.
Absolutely. So I do want to talk about that a little bit. Obviously, you're subject matter expert. You've lived it. You've written the books. For organizations that are looking at engagement, or maybe are wanting to look at engagement, where would you say the best place to start is? Do you start with measuring how you're doing? Do you start with learning and development? Where would you advise that we start to think about this if this is new for us?
Yeah. So this is going to sound self-serving because we do engagement surveys, but I don't really care who you use to do an engagement survey. But you need to have a baseline, right? And the baseline can't be, this is what HR thinks, or this is what the leaders think, because the leaders in HR always think more positively than what is really happening, right? So the metaphor I like to use, Kyle, you would never go to your doctor's office for your annual physical without getting blood work, right? And I think an engagement survey is your blood work for your organization. You need to know where are the pain points. So before you focus on training and development, is that a pain point? Is that where the focus should be? Is it do you have a leadership issue? I always look at an engagement survey, and I can tell from the first review that you don't have an engagement issue, you have a leadership trust issue. And because you have a leadership trust issue, it's trickling throughout the organization. So if you focus on training and development, that's not going to fix your leadership trust issue. So, give yourself some data and view engagement like the CFO views, the P&L statement. Capture your data. That gives you some idea of where to focus your energy, as well as what locations or departments or divisions you should be focusing your energy.
We'll be back after a quick break.
At my current company, I've generated 7 figures in revenue in just 6 months doing all the sales by myself. Just me and Rumi, my secret weapon. Rumi isn't just another meeting app. It's like Zoom or Google Meet, but with AI tools that supercharge my results. Rumi records every meeting, gives me real-time insights during sales calls, and if I've met with a prospect in the past, Rumi's meeting memory answers any questions I have before the call. I don't waste time digging through notes, Rumi preps me instantly. Go to tryrumi.ai, that's tryrumi.ai for a 14-day free trial.
Absolutely. And I can attest, we started doing this a few years ago. It really highlighted some areas of focus. The other thing it really helped us do was figure out what to actually prioritize. Because like you said, you could sit here and even in the 50% proactive stuff that you're trying to do, if you're throwing all your energy at a program that your employees don't feel like is a need, you're not going to move the needle as much as if you actually try to solve a problem that they have in their day-to-day work.
A great case study on that. In the year 2000, we were owned by a German firm. The firm I was with, we were about, at the time, about 1,200 employees. And we were acquired. The German parent, they wanted to exit their North American business. So they brought in a private equity firm, and we partnered with them. So I became a management owner because we all had to write checks too. And the private equity folks wanted to come in with a bang. So they said, Bob, what do you think of us doubling the 401k match? And, the typical HR response might be, oh, that's great news. Let's do it. So I said, well, that's going to cost us, I forget the amount, but let's just say, that was going to be like $1 million. I said, well, I'm not hearing a lot of people tell us that our 401k match is not competitive. In fact, it's probably right at the baseline of competitiveness. Why don't we ask our employees what they think? So we actually did a pulse survey, and overwhelming, the response was training and development. Like it wasn't even close. So, we had over 1,000 comments. No, one person said, can we have more 401k match dollars? Right? So what I used, I took that and I said, we could build a corporate university for a smaller amount than what you want to spend. Let's create a best-in-class corporate university. And that's what we did. And it was a game changer. So we were all set to spend money to fix a need that we didn't have. And we reallocated the funds to a need that we did have that, truly became an engagement game changer.
That's a great example. And I think a great reminder that we need to have a baseline and have a consistent, measurement style as well. I think I will put a plug in here, not necessarily to be serving you, Bob, specifically, but I do strongly believe you need to go to a professional survey company as opposed to trying to do all these surveys yourself, because there are, survey design is one of those sciences that you really need an expert to understand and then probably more importantly, to actually interpret that data in a way that's actionable, right?
Yep.
That's the other big issue, right?
And any survey provider, and I know all of them, and they all provide great benchmarks, right? Because if you do a survey without external benchmarks, I'm going to tell you right now, compensation is going to come in low, and you're going to think you have a compensation issue. Now, as it stands in these inflationary times, you probably do have a compensation issue.
They're probably legit.
Yeah. But typically, you don't have a compensation issue. And as soon as you benchmark it, you'll see that your compensation scores based on engagement could be in the top 90 percentile, right? So you end up focusing on things that you shouldn't be focusing on based on an artificial benchmark against yourself. So having the external benchmarks, I think, provides a very accurate prism on where you should be focusing your time and energy.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a great conversation. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time together, and I'm sure you're running off to another all-day workshop or something like that. So I want to shift gears and get into the Rebel HR flash round questions.
Yep.
Question number 1: where does HR need to rebel?
I would rebel on the administrative perception side of things, and be viewed organizationally as a driver of innovative thoughts inside your organization. When you think of innovation, you generally don't think of the HR department, right? But if you think of it, the HR department is the people department. Innovation is born from people. So how can you shift the perception organizationally that we are here providing administrative support, and we are here providing cutting edge consultative insights to the organization? That's what I would suggest.
Absolutely. Question number 2: who should we be listening to?
Yeah, so here's a plug for you. I love these disruptive folks that are doing the podcasts and the conferences, and I think there's a whole new breed of disruption taking place inside the function. People that I tend to kind of read and listen to. I love Malcolm Gladwell. I think he bridges personal and business in such a great way. I've spoken alongside Dan Pink. And his work is always exceptional, and it leads always with the people part of the business. Thomas Friedman is a brilliant mind. I think if you're not a global company today, you will be tomorrow. And his work, his legacy book, "The World Is Flat," is probably the greatest business book you'll ever read. On the innovation side, The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen from Harvard Business School is a must-read for every HR professional. Even if you read the Steve Jobs story, he'll reference it, that it changed his life. And if you're trying to be disruptive, one of the ways of getting there is to be more innovative yourself. And Clayton Christensen's work is a cutting edge work in the work of innovation.
Absolutely. I'll put a couple plugs out there. Bob's got a couple great books as well. I Engage, Your Personal Engagement Roadmap. Is that the most recent book?
Yeah, and it was written right before COVID. And, in some ways, because it really is about personal engagement and talks quite a bit about what happens at home influences you at work. And it was written for COVID times in some ways because of, as we all found ourselves, in hybrid workforces, right? So it's a terrific book. It's personal. It has 22 career rest stops. So it's not so much a book for leaders, although leaders love it to do with their team, but it's a wonderful book for an individual to figure out their own personal engagement and why it might be waning.
Absolutely. And then we'll also include in the show notes, there's actually on Bob's website, there's actually a page dedicated to employee engagement books. There's some other recommendations out there. Of course, his books are available. So open up your podcast player and click in there and you'll be able to find that. So last question, how can our listeners connect with you?
If you go on YouTube, some of the most watched videos in the world, who's sinking your boat? It's a video I did a few years back. It's had 1.3 million views. So there are some cool ways of connecting with me just on YouTube. And those are free ways, right? Things that you can do and share the videos. They're 4 minutes long. Share them with your team. A great way of leveraging engagement in a very inexpensive way. You can find me on employeeengagement.com, pretty easy website. There's a resource section. We post articles, best practices, a lot of free stuff. And then there's ways of seeing how you bring me in, either to give a talk. We do workshops. I was joking with Kyle before we went live that these Zoom talks have been very powerful because it allows me to wear shorts as I give a talk. So that's a benefit.
Yeah, and as far as you look professional to me, Bob. So shorts or whatever. Thanks. We talked about that on our first podcast ever, and I think we described it as it's like a reverse mullet, right? It's like there's business on top and a party on the bottom.
Yeah,
so, party on, Bob.
I love that. I'm going to steal that, but I will give you credit.
I think I stole it from some video I saw somewhere, so I can't take credit, but I love the description. So, Bob, this has just been absolutely wonderful. Again, I know your time is very valuable. I appreciate you giving us a couple minutes here. And I know that, our listeners are going to take a lot away from this. We'll have all that information in the show notes. Check it out. Really appreciate the time, Bob.
Hey, you're both a great professional colleague as well as a friend. Thank you, Kyle.
Thanks, Bob. Take care. All right. That does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.